Evening of September 16, 1989, village of Zelyonoye, Dubravo, Altai Krai, Russia. Not far from the last house in the village, a group of young people is having a picnic outdoors. Among them is their new acquaintance, 17-year-old Lyudmila Obidina, relaxing together with the local guys. As night approached, the young people were drinking and having fun. The girl notices more and more often that one of her new acquaintances is looking at her and smiling. She smiles back at him, and after a while the couple disappears into the twilight. The group takes it in stride and remains quite calm about it. The picnic is coming to an end, and the young people are heading home, not noticing that the couple hasn't returned. Her skeleton will be found a year later, in the fall of 1990. Back then, no one knew that she had become the first victim of a maniac who would remain uncaught for many decades, who was considered one of the most mysterious Russian maniacs, and about whom I had already made a video on the Strashnota channel before he was caught. The city of Barnaul is the administrative center of the Altai Krai and the fifth largest city in Siberia by population. It is considered the cultural, industrial, and educational center of the region. There are many universities and technical schools here, where thousands of high school graduates from all over Western Siberia come to continue their studies. Altai State Pedagogical University and Altai State Technical University are especially popular among young people. The latter is a whole complex of many buildings connected by walkways and semi-basements where it's easy to get lost. The lighting is dim, then goes out completely. It's to save electricity. Dimitorzo created old orders from the rector. In June 1998, the police receive a report. A prospective student of the Altai State Pedagogical University, 17-year-old Yana Shalamova, came to apply and just disappeared. A week later, her body will be pulled out of the Ob River, which flows near the city, by fishermen. The police decided it was an accident. She went for a swim and drowned. But 10 days later, on June 17, another girl, Galina Daring, also a prospective student at ALTGPU, goes missing. A month later, her body, with multiple wounds from a sharp object, was found partially buried in a forest near the village of Buranovo in the Kalmansky district. The search for the perpetrator was unsuccessful. There were no witnesses or suspects. Another unsolved case, of which there were plenty in those turbulent post-Soviet times. Time passed and the girls were forgotten, the cases sent to a dusty archive. In the summer of the following year, 1999, 21-year-old resident of Tuva, Chodura Urzhak, left her dormitory and went to Altai State Technical University, Altai State Technical University, to submit her application documents. She didn't return. Her classmates saw her going up the steps to the main building, but after that, she disappeared. Her body was discovered a year later in Vreg, at the 27th kilometer of the Barnaul-Rubtsovsk highway in the Kalmansky district. 27-year-old Svetlana Filipchenko, who came to Barnaul from Novosibirsk in search of work, soon disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her acquaintances said that she wanted to get a job as a cleaner at Altai State Technical University, and on August 9, previously from Zarinsk, 27-year-old Natalia Berdisheva disappeared without a trace in the building of the Cooperative Technical School. She also wanted to find a job, but the police were reluctant to accept reports of disappearances. The Ministry of Internal Affairs lazily speculated they might have gone partying or just wanted a change of scenery. They were in no hurry to look for the missing people, and certainly didn't bother to connect the facts of all the girls' disappearances. In the city's universities in 2000, there were a lot of people wanting to enroll in Altai State Technical University, about 8,000 people. Yulia Tektikova hesitated to submit her documents because she was intimidated by the numerous buildings and complicated passages at the university. However, on June 29, her parents made her go to the admissions office, recalls Nadezhda Tektikova, Yulia Yulina's mother. She said, "Mom, there are such catacombs there." I told her, "Yul, you remember something, and besides, you can always ask someone. You're a grown girl." I literally pushed her out that day to the university. The girl's father gave her a ride and waited until she went into the building. After that, neither he nor her mother ever saw their daughter again. That same evening, they went to the police, but there they decided that Yulia had simply run away from home and would return soon. Tears come to my eyes when I remember my daughter's last day, but the past can't be brought back. On July 12, a new incident occurred. Elena Anisimova went missing. The 18-year-old girl came to apply to vocational school number 35 and vanished without a trace, and again, no one saw anything. 2 weeks later, on July 28, the mother of 16-year-old Liliana Wozniuk filed a report with the police. While she was taking her entrance exams, the girl stayed in the student dormitory. When she didn't return to her room, her roommates raised the alarm and contacted her mother. Meanwhile, the frightening disappearances continued. On August 1, applicant Olga Shmakova disappeared without a trace in the building of ALTGPU. She came to submit her application documents and vanished within the walls of the university. Olga's father came to the district police station to file a report, but they were in no hurry to register it. The investigator only began working on the case after a scandal and a promise to report the lawlessness to Moscow. If at that time the investigators had bothered to study all the disappearance cases, they would have noticed an interesting detail. All the disappearances happened on Tuesdays. Shmakova's father tried to mention this, but they didn't even listen to him. Who are you trying to teach here, professional investigators? August 8th, Tuesday, and once again, a girl disappears. 17-year-old Anzela Burdakova, a blonde beauty with short hair. She submitted an application for the paid department of the Faculty of Food Technology and walked out into the hallway with the form. No one has seen her since then. Angela's parents raised the alarm that same day, recalls Angela's mother, Tatiana. They only accepted our statement on the 9th calls and more calls, but no results. At that time we, along with other parents, met with the deputy mayor, Bavarin, and told him that our children were missing. He said, "What, do you want to turn the whole city upside down because of your children? We have City Day coming up." But the relatives didn't give up. They printed and posted flyers with photos of their missing daughters all over the city. They questioned the university's professors and graduate students, but no one had seen or heard anything, and at night someone started deliberately tearing down the flyers. After Angela disappeared, the police finally decided to try catching the criminal using bait. The targets were female students from the police academy who wore short skirts and walked around the university while police officers were on duty in the courtyard. However, the criminal didn't pay attention to any of the cadets. A couple of days later, the officers called off this masquerade. Suddenly, the criminal might already be far away, and such disorder won't happen again. Olga Shmakova's father waited for the next Tuesday in horror. Could his suspicion really be confirmed? And so, on August 15, 2000 Tuesday, student Ksenia Kirgizova, who had recently passed her entrance exams successfully, comes to the university. She wanted to get her student identification as well as clean the windows and desks before the start of the school year. However, I'm not sure she actually wanted to clean anything. In any case, she had to do it. That's why she went there. Quickly, after work, she and her friend went home, but she suddenly remembered she needed to ask the admissions office about transferring to a state-funded place. She had to walk down a long corridor from one building to another, but this didn't scare the student, because it seemed that nothing could happen to her within the university walls. However, Ksenia never made it to the admissions office. The girl disappears, just like all the previous ones. Her parents, having lost their daughter, turned to the police, where the girls are disappearing. What is happening in the Barnaul universities? Panic was growing in the city. Female students tried to go to universities and technical schools together. Their parents would walk them there and meet them in the evenings. The rumor mill was already spreading stories about a maniac whose victims were young, beautiful applicants and female university students. He goes hunting on Tuesdays. Ksenia became the 5th girl to go missing at Altai State Technical University, and only after her disappearance did investigators start looking into the cases of the missing girls. And apparently that only happened because it turned out Ksenia was the daughter of an influential businessman from Barnaul who insisted that the search for the missing girls begin. To anyone who could provide any information about his daughter's whereabouts, Vladimir Kyrgyzov promised to pay $50,000, and it was only Vladimir Kyrgyzov's intervention that finally got the investigation into the disappearances moving. Before that, the police weren't actively searching, and the hotline numbers for information about the missing weren't answering. As a result, it was only after Ksenia's disappearance that the police and the prosecutor's office opened a criminal case, which they combined into a single investigation. A group consisting of more than 100 people took over the investigation. Interestingly, a significant part of the group was made up of women. Also, investigators from Novosibirsk came to the city. But Kyrgyzov didn't really count on the efficiency of the local authorities. He sent his people to check the train stations, set up improvised checkpoints at the exits from the city, but the time had already been lost. No information, and no sign of the missing people either. And soon, the prosecutor's attention was drawn to 2 more strange recent incidents. On July 14th, 2000 in Barnaul, 53-year-old Valentina Mikhailyukova, the mother of a prospective student at the Altai Agricultural University, went missing. She came with her daughter, hoping to get her into the paid program. According to her daughter, Valentina was going to visit the admissions office and find a way to help her daughter get in. She even took money with her, but she never came back home. One of the students interviewed remembered seeing her getting into a white Mark's car in the university square. No, he didn't remember, nor did he recall the appearance of the driver. And on July 1843-year-old Nina Shakirova, who worked at the Altai Institute of Culture, disappeared without a trace. At first, the police believed that the girls and women might have fallen victim to pimps who were operating in the region at that time. Investigators say the girls were taken to Novosibirsk, had their documents seized, and were sold to a brothel. But during inspections of all known shady places, this version was not confirmed. If this is the work of one person, most likely a maniac, then it's necessary to look among the teachers or students, the investigators decided. Then the main theory became the so-called Dean's Office theory. Experienced detectives believed that a certain man would meet with female applicants under the pretext of helping them with admission problems, introducing himself either as a deputy or an assistant to the rector or the dean. Such a scheme was very common in those years among perverts who seduced inexperienced girls, recalls Igor Bespalov, senior detective of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Altai territory. All of them disappeared during the day in front of people. After all, you can't just grab someone and drag them into the bushes or around the corner. They must have had a reason to go with the criminal or something similar. He offered them something like offering an applicant help with getting into college. Well, obviously not everyone would go for that. So he approached many people. They began interviewing female students, applicants, and professors. Of course, other theories were considered, but they focused all their efforts on the Dean's Office theory, as it seemed the most promising. During the investigation, 35,000 people were interviewed, professors, staff, students, and applicants. Several female applicants said that during the exam period they met a man who offered them help with admission. Age 40 to 45, medium build, height 175, 180 cm, dark blonde hair, crew cut, regular and pleasant facial features. A composite sketch was made, which was shown on local television according to the sketch. Employees of Altai State Technical University recognized one of their colleagues. A dean from one of the departments really did approach attractive applicants to get acquainted with them in order to have a good time. The suspect was immediately put under investigation, but his involvement in the disappearances was not confirmed. A total of 71 composite sketches were made of people who offered various services to female applicants at Barnaul universities. Car owners at the nearby parking lot were also checked. In parallel with the investigation into the missing female applicants at Altai State Technical University, law enforcement officers uncovered 36 other crimes related to the moral misconduct of teachers at Altai State Technical University itself. Cases of bribery were uncovered, as well as sexual harassment by teachers towards female students and applicants. After verifying the received information, several university teachers were dismissed, including the unlucky dean. Meanwhile, in early September 2000, near the village of Lyudmila, local mushroom pickers found cut-up women's clothing, a map of the structure of ALTGTU, and a notebook that belonged to Ksenia Kyrgyzova, who went missing on August 15th. It is noteworthy that the notebook was hanging on a tree 1 meter above the ground. What the criminal meant by this is unclear. While examining the surroundings of the Lyudmila settlement, the investigators discovered 5 fresh graves at the local cemetery. The locals had no idea who was inside, and when the police broke open the tombstones, they were stunned. All the graves were empty. Who and why someone needed to dig 5 graves in a remote village remained unanswered. Perhaps the criminal decided to play a prank on the search team. Either way, the search continued. Along the Barnaul fields, there is a place called Crisamish. In the last century, that's the 20th century, scientific experiments were conducted there. They released rodents and used poisonous chemicals, apparently to test their effectiveness, says a local resident, Nikolai, who worked in the police at that time and was part of the search team. The first girl was found about 2.5 kilometers from the village, not far from Crisamish. There's a small grove there, and that's where the bare bones were lying. There were no clothes. I remember the rib cage was clearly visible, and the skull. The body wasn't buried. He just covered it with some branches, that's all. It was 26-year-old Natalia Berdisheva. In August 1999, the woman traveled from Zarinsk to Barnaul to apply for a job at the Cooperative Technical School. This is where the maniac set up his cemetery. On October 1, the body of Angela Burdakov was discovered in the Kalman district. Later, the bodies of 21-year-old Tuvinian Chodura Orzhak and 17-year-old Yelena Anisimova were found, as well as Valentina Mikhailyukova and Nina Shakirova, who had come to the city to find out about their children's admission. Under pressure from regional authorities and the public, the investigation rushed to comb the area. Conscript soldiers were brought in, and a description of the suspect was distributed to all district officers and patrols. And again, a terrible discovery: the remains of Svetlana Oparina, another applicant to LGPU. Her marginalized parents didn't care much about their daughter, so they didn't even file a missing person report with the police. The last to be found was the decomposed body of Ksenia Kyrgyzova. The remains of Olga Shmakova and Yulia Tektikova were discovered only a year later, and it took 3 years to find the remains of Liliana Voznyuk. All the remains were examined by forensic experts. The girls were killed in different ways. One had stab wounds, another had a traumatic brain injury, and for the others, the experts could not give a definitive conclusion. The bodies were in a state of pronounced putrefactive changes. But unofficially, they said that almost all of them were strangled, some with hands, others with a rope. It was also assumed the victims experienced something frightening before they died. After that, the investigators finally decided that the deaths of the girls and women were caused by the same person. Then the Russian Prosecutor General's office joined the investigation, and investigators from the capital arrived in Barnaul. Colonel General Vladimir Kolesnikov, who investigated the Andrei Chikatilo case on October 31, 2000, headed the investigative team. During the press conference, he stated that he would find the criminal within 10 days. 2 days before that, 45-year-old shoe salesman Alexander Anisimov was detained, who became one of the main suspects. A first-year student, Anastasia Sumanosova, testified against him, saying that in the summer, Anisimov approached her while she was on the university grounds. To be continued. According to her, the man introduced himself as the dean of the economics faculty and offered to help her with admission. But the girl was alarmed by the fact that Alexander gave the wrong title for his position, since a rector is in charge of the whole university, while individual faculties are headed by deans. Anastasia refused the stranger and he left her alone. In the fall, the girl saw Anisimov at the market, where he was selling shoes, and she realized that he matched the description of the maniac very closely. Moreover, it was him that Anastasia had seen near the university. The girl immediately called the police. Investigator Igor Bespalov had seen Alexander not long before that when he was picking out boots for his wife. It turned out that the man was just an ordinary salesman and had nothing to do with teaching. At the suspect's house, the police found a sawed-off shotgun, handcuffs, as well as hunting knives and axes. But it was unclear how he could be connected to these crimes, since the perpetrator was clearly well acquainted with the Altai State Technical University building, with its numerous wings and long corridors. Investigators say only someone who worked or studied at the university could have known this. Alexander Anisimov was only charged with illegal possession of weapons, but he did not want to admit his guilt in the series of brutal crimes. Vladimir Kolesnikov wanted to keep his promise by any means and present the criminal to the city, so he allowed investigators to use the harshest methods during interrogations. And this brought results. On his very first night in the detention center, the man tried to take his own life, but the attempt failed. Igor Bespalov chose to speak to him directly. But as soon as they started talking about the missing girls, the salesman fell silent. The investigation had no direct evidence against Anisimov, but later he decided to turn himself in. The investigation methods were clearly effective. Alexander confessed that he committed the crime for the sake of jewelry, which he sold to dealers. The investigative experiment was scheduled for November 1, 2000, but Anisimov just couldn't find the right house. When he supposedly recognized the building where the fence lived, he asked to have his handcuffs removed for a while. Alexander darted out as soon as the elevator doors opened. Ignoring the chase, he climbed to the top floor and jumped out of an open stairwell window. They found him dead below. While some investigators were trying to get information from Anisimov, the chief of the Barnaul police, Nikolai Turbovets, found another suspect, one of the professors at Altai State Technical University. In the professor's garage, his daughter found obscene photos and other intimate items. Shocked by her discovery and frightened by the events in the city, the girl went to the police. Turbovets told Colonel General Kolesnikov about his findings, and Kolesnikov ordered the professor to be detained and brought in for questioning. There it turned out that the man had nothing to do with the deaths, as he had a solid alibi for each day someone went missing, and the obscene photos were connected to the professor's mistress and their intimate activities. At the press conference, Kolesnikov announced that the likely perpetrator, Alexander Anisimov, had been found and arrested, but would not be punished because he had taken his own life. But despite this, the investigation was left with far more questions than answers. Many people, including Nikolai Turbovets, were not convinced of Anisimov's guilt. In December 2000, Vladimir Rushailo, who was then the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, came to Barnaul for an inspection. There were reshuffles and layoffs in the regional police department. The disappearances of girls stopped after Anisimov's death, and Barnaul breathed a sigh of relief. In 2003, the case was suspended because the investigation had no leads left and there were no more suspects. For a long time, the Barnaul maniac remained uncaught, elusive, a legendary maniac about whom theories and guesses were made. And, I repeat, I released a video on my channel Strashnota. It was the second video since the channel was created. And in 2022, when the Barnaul maniac case had not yet been reopened, and they only took up this series again in February 2023, as Roman Shapoval, deputy head of the forensics department of the investigative committee of the Russian Federation for the Altai territory, says, investigating unsolved cases from previous years is one of the priority tasks of the investigative committee, and they regularly return to them using new forensic methods. First, they began to investigate the case of Lyudmila Obidina, whose body was found in 1989 near the village of Zelenaya Dubrava. Witnesses were interviewed, each of whom was tested with a lie detector. I'm really curious though, what can you actually remember about some drunken get-together after 34 years? Nevertheless, a local official, the deputy head of the village of Shadrino, Vitaly Manishin, also came under suspicion, but at first the investigation did not consider him a potential maniac. Vitaly Manishin, born in 1970, a native of the village of Zelenaya Dubrava, graduated from the Altai State Agrarian University in the 1990s and then became the chief veterinarian in the village of Shadrino. Then he got promoted and became the head of the collective farm. He was elected as a deputy and later held the position of head of the administration of the Shadrinsky Village Council, after which he became the deputy head of the administration of the Kalmansky district, the very same district where, in 2000, the bodies of the missing girls from Barnaul were found. Back then, in distant 1989, he was still a student at the veterinary college. Manishin said he and Lyudmila waited a long time for their friends, but when they didn't show up, they went home separately. Lyudmila was supposed to leave for Kazakhstan the next day, so her disappearance didn't raise any questions among the locals. During the interrogation, Manishin was asked to once again describe the circumstances of the girl's disappearance in the village of Zelenaya Dubrava. During this tactically well-conducted interrogation, the suspect deviated slightly from his previous version in such a way that his lie immediately became obvious. He was the last person to see Lyudmila Obidina alive that evening in 1989. At the time of the crime, he was 19 years old, recalls Roman Shapoval, deputy head of the forensic department of the investigative committee of Russia for the Altai territory. Another review of the 1990 case made it possible to establish that Manishin was directly involved in it. When we get some results, we start comparing cases with others that are similar in the way the crime was committed, the motive, and so on, says Shapoval. This chain of events led investigators to believe that Manishin might be involved in a high-profile series of crimes. And later, this was proven by expert examinations, including biological studies on the polygraph, new witness interrogations, identifications, face-to-face confrontations, and ultimately the suspect's own confession, says Roman Shapoval. At first, the suspect Anisimov didn't provide any new details during interrogations, only repeating what was reported in the media. But from Manishin, we learned previously unknown details. He even pointed out locations with the victim's remains, meaning he spoke about details that only the perpetrator could have known. Interestingly, his name had come up from the very beginning, back in 2000. An unknown woman called the police and said that the maniac was Vitaly Manishin. At that time, he held the position of deputy head of the very district where the bodies of the female applicants and women were found. But at that time, dozens of calls were coming in, and all of them were processed and checked. They checked Manishin too, but couldn't prove anything. Besides, the investigators found it unlikely that an administration official would be involved in such crimes. Ivan Zelensky, senior investigator for major cases with Russia's investigative committee in Altai territory, frequently communicated with Manishin during the investigation, he recalls. He gives the impression of being a competent, educated person, with well-structured speech, the ability to formulate questions, and to give detailed answers, which makes him easy to talk to. Everyone who knows him says that he knows how to engage in dialogue and persuade. It's no wonder he held the position of deputy head of the rural settlement, which allowed him to travel to Barnaul on business freely and with almost no oversight. In addition, every summer he took advanced training and career guidance courses at various universities according to his position. This is what helped the maniac commit crimes without falling under suspicion. He chose an exclusively practical scheme. He would come to a university where in the summer there were many applicants, their parents and teachers, a crowd where it's easy to get lost. In that crowd, he would find attractive, outstanding girls, start a conversation with them, and during the conversation he would hint that he could help with admission, explains Ivan Zelensky. Many once believed you couldn't solve the issue without connections, influence, or money. Each victim had issues. Some missed document deadlines, others couldn't find their names on lists, or wanted to switch from paid to budget-funded spots. He himself says that he could sense whether he could persuade a girl or not if she didn't want to talk. He didn't insist on committing new crimes right away. He would wait a year until, in his opinion, the right conditions appeared, when many female applicants came to Barnaul who didn't know the university staff by face. Manishin chose those who came alone and were very nervous. All his victims voluntarily left the university with him and got into his white Zhiguli 6 car. Manishin, under various pretexts, would take them out of the city to forested areas, where he would assault them and strangle them with a belt, rope, his hands, or a seatbelt. Not far from the village of Shadrina, he had a hut set up where he could clean himself up and calmly get rid of any evidence left in the car after the crime. Manishin met his first victim, Chudura Orzak, near the main building of Altai Polytechnic on Lenin Avenue in Barnaul, and under the pretext of helping her get a state-funded place, offered to take her out of town. At the 26th kilometer of the Barnaul-Rubtsovsk highway, he drove into a small forest, where he pulled out a knife and, threatening her with it, cut off all her clothes. Then he assaulted her in the back seat of the car and strangled her with a rope. The police did not take any search measures at that time, and encouraged by his impunity, the maniac continued looking for victims. He promised Svetlana Filipchenko to help her get a job, and the trusting woman went with him to an interview with the right person at a dacha. When it was all over, he threw the unfortunate woman's body into the forest thickets and covered it with dry branches. He met Natalia Berdisheva at the entrance to ALTGPU, got acquainted with her, and promised to help her with paperwork through the right person at a country dacha. After seating her in the car, he drove out of the city, choosing a secluded spot. He was already acting according to a well-rehearsed plan. Manishin dragged the body from the car and hid it in a ravine, covering it with dirt and branches. Her remains were found only 20 minutes later, 3 years. One of the girls, Olga Shmakova, he killed with a blow to the head with a fire extinguisher. She fought back desperately, so he decided to get rid of her quickly. 17-year-old Ksenia Kirgizova became the last victim of the Polytechnic maniac. She disappeared on August 15, 2000. At that time, the girl had been admitted to the university and came to the campus for some work. She went to the dean's office to find out if she could transfer from a paid program to a budget-funded one. The last person to see her was a fellow student at the entrance to the main building of the Polytechnic. The investigation believes that Manishin met Kyrgyzova at the university's round-shaped alley, known as the Skovorodka. He promised that he would help her transfer to a tuition-free spot and said that the person who handles these matters lives outside the city. As Manishin admitted, he didn't like blood and only used knives to scare an uncooperative victim. That's why the investigators couldn't charge him with the episode involving Galina Daring, whose body was cut with a knife. Subtitles created by Dima Torzok refused to admit that the body of Yana Shalamova, found by fishermen in the Ob, was his doing. It's about the other cases. In total, Manishin confessed to 11 crimes he acted according to his own method, which did not allow for any living witnesses. The only exception was the death of a 53-year-old applicant's mother. She had no intimate relationship with him. In this case, it was motivated by greed. The woman let the criminal know that she had money, which she was willing to give in exchange for help with her daughter's admission. Manishin took the money from her, recalls Yevgeny Stepanov, senior counselor of justice and head of the department of the Altai Krai prosecutor's office for supervision of the investigative committee's procedural activities. In addition to the confession, the defendant's involvement in each of the crimes is confirmed by a set of physical evidence. By the way, the investigation and the prosecutor's office thoroughly checked Manishin's involvement in other murders. It's hard to imagine that a maniac could suddenly stop like that, but he did stop, and he gave the explanation himself. I did this during a difficult period in my life. My wife and I were separating. She didn't appreciate me and humiliated me, and that's what pushed me to meet other women. As soon as I met a woman who behaved properly, the need for crimes disappeared, and I stopped. See, pay attention to how it happens. But the investigators think differently. The maniac stopped after there was a big public outcry following the investigation, and the suspect Anisimov died. At that time, Manishin dug those 5 graves, trying to confuse the investigation. He wanted the police to look for a madman, not an ordinary, normal person. He got scared. The public outcry, the search for the missing, and the questioning of witnesses just got on his nerves. After the first suspect died, he assumed everyone would think he was the culprit. Manishin wanted to forget it. During the search, we even found psychological brochures about how to erase memory. But at the same time, he says he knew that sooner or later they would come for him. Back then, in the fall of 2000, he sold his car and since then tried to live a normal life. Moreover, when the remains of one of the victims were recovered in the Shadrin area, he was brought in as a witness. Something happened to the law enforcement officer's car, and Manishin was asked to drive the officers there and at the same time sign the protocol. He lay low for a long time, pretending to be a model family man and an active manager. At first, the villagers didn't believe the news, but then the maniac confessed to everything himself, says Anna Proskoryakova, a resident of the village of Zelenaya Dubrava. It was a complete shock. I had doubts until I saw the video with his words. There were always kids playing on our street and plenty of beautiful girls around. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Maybe he was afraid to do something like that in his own village? And here's what Mikhail Alexievich, who moved to the village of Shadrino from Barnaul in 1996, had to say. At that time, Vitaly Manishin was still living with his first wife and daughters in a house next to mine. Later, the family split up and Manishin's ex-wife took the girls to Barnaul, forbidding him to contact them. I don't know why, but people were saying that he did. He wasn't indifferent to his own young daughters. Manishin's first wife worked at a university and was about 12 to 15 years older than Vitaly. Perhaps, knowing the specifics of his wife's job, Manishin came up with stories that he used when talking to female applicants. Introducing himself as an influential person from Polytech, Vitaly soon became close to the widow Tatiana, who worked as an accountant in the village of Shadrino and was raising 2 children. In 2001, Vitaly moved into her house. They started living together and they had a large household farm. And although Vitaly and Tatiana were not formally married, people in the village habitually called them husband and wife. An ordinary guy like everyone noticed nothing and just shrugged. Mikhail Alexievich worked as a veterinarian in the collective farm, then went to work in the village council, didn't drink, and in general, he and Tatiana lived normally. I never saw any fights, recalls Ksenia, who lived in Shadrino 18 years ago. He loved animals. When he still worked at the farm, my sister and I often went there with our grandmother. Vitaly Evgenyevich Manishin treated us to candies and cookies. He was friendly. Then such a nice official took another position, and his house was very good for those times. You could even call it a cottage. Manishin tried not to attract attention to himself, but everything changed when his stepson got into a car accident in 2020, recalls neighbor Mikhail Alexievich. He promoted his stepson everywhere. He became the school principal, and in 2020 he struck a student with his car and left the scene. They say that Vitaly helped hide the car, but I don't know how true that is. In any case, after that, people started to feel disgusted toward him. Anyone else in his place would have quit their job, but not him. The school principal was quickly detained because the student who was harmed recognized the car. The villager was fired, and the court sentenced him to 3 years in a penal settlement and ordered him to pay 700,000 rubles in compensation for moral damages. Tatiana and Vitaly's house now looks empty. The windows are covered with thick curtains and in some places with rags. In the first months after her husband's arrest, Tatiana still talked to journalists and told them how she hired lawyers for him, but he refused their help. While the lady of the house tries to live a normal life, she manages the house and the garden, goes to the store, and surely receives guests. Her husband, whose guilt she did not believe in. For the next few months, he will see only the cell, the detention center, the court, and the escort. It's impossible to find out anything from the woman right now. When she spots journalists near her house, she yells from inside, threatening to call the police, but doesn't step onto the porch. Vitaly Manishin has no close relatives left in Zelenaya Dubrava. He has a cousin, but he's a heavy drinker. It turns out that his testimony played a decisive role in the case of Lyudmila Obidina back in 1989. To the investigators who came to the village back in 1990 after the girl's remains were found, he supposedly said that he saw the deceased the next morning, even though by that time she was already dead. On June 17, 2024, Vitaly Manishin was brought to the village of Kalmanka for the first court hearing. The Red Courthouse building is next to the administration office, where until 2023 he worked as the deputy head of the rural settlement of the village of Kalmanka, where he served as the deputy head of the district. It looks quite prosperous and somewhat charming in a rural way. This is the district center. Life here goes on as usual, as they say. The locals have their own shovels, and it seems they don't care what happens in the red building, but they know very well who will be brought here. Someone who, just a couple of years ago, used to walk around the village, greet the locals, and stop by the local shop to buy varenets. The victims also came here for the first hearing, among them Vladimir Kyrgyzov with his ex-wife and son. They haven't lived in the Altai region for a long time. They moved to the south, and that's where they drove from, arriving in a car with Krasnodar license plates. Of course it bothers me that Manishin then went into hiding, says Vladimir Kyrgyzov. So, he's not a pathological killer. Maybe there are people like that, especially since he's a coward. When the commotion started, he just got scared and went quiet. A person who takes the lives of girls can't be brave, normal, or an ordinary person with normal reactions. He's just a scoundrel and a coward, to put it mildly, says Vladimir. Valentina Mikhailyukova's children also arrived. She is the only adult woman among the victims. According to the investigation, he took her life out of greed. The 9,000 rubles that the woman was ready to pay to get her daughter a state-funded spot attracted attention. The first hearing took less than an hour. Vitaly Manishin admitted his guilt, and the judge explained to the victims that each of the 11 episodes would be heard separately. The case of the Polytechnic maniac consists of 69 volumes in total. The hearing for Ksenia Kirgizova will be the last one. She is considered to be Manishin's final victim. It is worth noting that the psychological and psychiatric examination found the accused to be fully sane and did not find any signs of disorders, including sexual ones. As attorney Vedana Shoshova explained, even for especially serious crimes there is a statute of limitations, which is 15 years. It can be extended if the criminal was put on the wanted list and was hiding from the investigation. But Vitaly Manishin was not put on the wanted list. However, he committed crimes that are punishable by life imprisonment. Whether exemption from criminal liability due to the statute of limitations applies will be decided by the court. The investigator in Vitaly Manishin's case, Igor Zelensky, confirms this. There have already been crimes committed in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics for which the perpetrators received severe punishment. According to the Investigative Committee of Russia for the Altai Krai, Manishin may avoid a life sentence because of the statute of limitations. He committed his first crime in the late 1980s and the others in the early 2000s. Investigators do not rule out that there may be many more victims, and indeed, Manishin avoided a life sentence. October 1, 2025. The court in the Altai region sentenced the Polytechnic maniac to 25 years in prison. He will spend the first 7 years in jail and the rest in a high-security penal colony. One of the main mysteries of Russian true crime and Russian serial killers has been solved. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments. Out of curiosity, you can watch the first video about the Barnaul maniac on the Strashnota channel, back when he hadn't been caught yet and his name was still unknown. Like, dislike and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and watch other videos on Strashnota. They come out, even if you don't always get notifications.